Silver, revenge.
Imagine giving your entire life to your child, dreaming of the day you'd see her walk down the aisle, only to wake up to an email that says, "Mom, don't come to my wedding. Watch through live stream." I'm Evelyn Harper, 59, a widow from Oregon, a mother who poured every penny, every sacrifice into my daughter Rachel's happiness. I'd already given $30,000 for her dream wedding in Napa Valley, picturing her smile as I watched her say, "I do." But on a Tuesday morning in June 2024, her words sliced through me like a blade Michael's mother wants to keep it intimate. You can watch through Google Meet, LOL. That LOL wasn't just a laugh, it was a dismissal. A cruel reminder that my love, my sacrifices, meant nothing to her anymore. I didn't cry, didn't scream, but something inside me broke a quiet fracture that led me to a decision that would change everything. Stay with me as I share how I turned that betrayal into a boundary I never thought I'd set. And at the end, I'd love to hear in the comments, what's the hardest boundary you've ever had to draw? I'm Evelyn, an office manager at a law firm in Portland, Oregon, where I've worked for nearly 2 decades to keep my family afloat. I live in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where birds chirp at dawn and neighbors wave from their porches, a place I've called home since my husband passed away suddenly when my kids were teenagers. I raised 2 children, Rachel, now 32, and Daniel, 29, pouring every ounce of myself into ensuring they never struggled the way I did growing up, scraping by on my single mother's paycheck after my father left. I worked extra shifts, skipped vacations, drove the same car for 14 years all, so Rachel and Daniel could have the stability I never had. I never kept score, mothers. Don't write. But that Tuesday morning, June 3, 2024, changed everything. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air, the early spring chill seeping through the window as I scrolled through my inbox. An email from Rachel caught my eye. No subject line, just her name glowing on the screen. I smiled, my heart lifting, thinking it was a sweet note or an update about her wedding to Michael, her fiancé, set to take place in Napa Valley. We'd spoken a few weeks ago about her plans, and I'd already contributed $30,000 my life savings to help her book the venue, secure a photographer, and reserve the florist she'd loved since college. I'd been saving that money for years, dreaming of the day I'd see her walk down the aisle, her smile a reflection of every sacrifice I'd made. I opened the email expecting joy, but the words hit me like a knife. "Mom, it started, no dear Mom, just a label, cold and clinical." Rachel wrote that Michael and his family had finalized the guest list, and after much thought, they'd decided it was best for me to watch the wedding via live stream, not in person. Michael's mother, she explained, was particular about the guest count and wanted to keep things intimate. The final line felt like salt in an open wound. "If you want to be a part of it, you can watch through the Google Meet link we've created. Should be just like being there. LOL." I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold, the steam fading as the words burned into me. LOL, as if excluding your own mother from your wedding after she'd given everything was a joke. My hands didn't tremble. My eyes didn't tear up. Something inside me quietly shifted like the ground had cracked open beneath me, but I was still standing. I replied with 4 words, "Sure. Enjoy your big day." No emotion, no argument, just a quiet withdrawal. I knew those words would echo louder than any scream. I didn't want to fight, didn't want tears. I wanted clarity, the kind that comes when you stop pretending your sacrifices mean anything to those you've given them to. I closed my laptop, finished my now cold coffee, and got ready for work, the routine a shield against the pain threatening to swallow me. But as I drove to the office, Oregon's early spring air biting at my skin, my mind circled one question. How did we get here? I've worked at Harper & Ellis Law for 18 years, a stable job that's kept me grounded since my husband's death. It's not glamorous filing contracts, managing schedules, answering phones, but it's what I needed after losing him when I was left to figure out how to pay bills and keep Rachel and Daniel in school. I remember standing in front of our old washing machine bills spread across the counter, calculating how to afford groceries and Rachel's college deposit. I gave up weekends, canceled vacations, skipped birthdays, telling myself there'd be time for me later. There never was. Every penny went to my kids, Rachel's extra credits, when she changed majors, twice her deposit, when she moved to New York for a short-lived job, her plane ticket back when it fell apart. I flew out at 27 to hold her hand through a breakup, making tea in a kitchen that didn't feel like home. When Daniel wanted to buy a house with his fiancée, I co-signed the mortgage and wrote a $10,000 check without hesitation. I never kept score, that's what mothers do, right? But that email made me feel like a transaction, like I'd been useful until I wasn't, like I had a shelf life that had expired. At the office, my boss, James, stopped by my desk, a rare man who remembers birthdays and how I take my coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, setting a latte from the cafe downstairs in front of me. I wanted to tell him my daughter disinvited me from her wedding, but I smiled instead, saying I hadn't slept well. He didn't push his kindness, a small act that nearly undid me. That latte, that silence reminded me I still existed, even if my own daughter didn't see me. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed. Rachel, again, her name, a spotlight I didn't want. Voicemails, texts. "Mom, please answer. We need to talk. This isn't funny." I didn't listen, didn't respond. I sipped my latte, the warmth, a contrast to the coldness in my heart, and thought, maybe it's time to stop being the one who always answers. Maybe it's time to stop playing a role in someone else's story when they won't let me on the stage. That afternoon, I made a decision that would shift everything, not to scream, not to beg, but to act, to reclaim the power I'd given away for too long. That decision I made on Tuesday, June 3, 2024, after Rachel's email disinviting me from her wedding, wasn't born from anger. It came from a quiet, unshakable clarity. Sitting at my desk at Harper & Ellis Law, the latte James had brought me growing cold, I felt the weight of her words. "You can watch through Google Meet," LOL, like a stone in my chest. I'd given $30,000 for her dream wedding in Napa Valley, poured decades of sacrifices into her life, only to be reduced to a virtual spectator, a ghost in her perfect day. As the office buzzed around me, phones ringing, colleagues chatting, I realized I'd been playing a role in Rachel's story for too long, always the giver, always the one who answered, always the mother who stayed silent. But that email with its casual cruelty cracked something open inside me, and I knew I had to reclaim the power I'd given away. After work, I didn't go straight home. I drove to First Federal Bank, a few blocks from the office, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across Portland's streets. The air still held a spring chill, but I barely noticed my mind focused on the task ahead. David, the branch manager who'd helped me set up college funds and retirement accounts over the years, greeted me with a warm smile. "Mrs. Harper," he said, standing to shake my hand. "What can I do for you today?" I sat across from him, placing my purse on the floor, my voice calm, almost too calm. "I need to cancel a wire transfer," I said. He blinked his fingers, pausing over his keyboard. "The one to the Napa venue." David hesitated, his brow furrowing. "There may be a cancellation fee depending on timing, but may I ask why?" I met his gaze, my tone steady. "The circumstances have changed." He looked something up on his screen, then nodded. "You're in luck it hasn't processed yet, just in time." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "Are you sure, Mrs. Harper, $50,000 is a significant amount?" I nodded, unyielding. "I'm sure." That $50,000 was the second payment I'd planned to send on top of the $30,000 I'd already given, $80,000 total for a wedding I wasn't allowed to attend. I signed the forms, my hand steady, and left the bank without a second thought. By the time I got home, my phone was lit up with notifications, 9 missed calls from Rachel, 2 from Daniel, a voicemail from Rachel that simply said, "Mom, please don't do this." I turned off my phone, the silence a deliberate choice. In the kitchen, I reached for a bottle of red wine I'd been saving for Thanksgiving, a holiday Rachel was supposed to visit, but canceled last minute for work. I poured a glass, took it to the porch, and sat in the fading sunlight, the birds chirping in the trees, a neighbor's dog barking in the distance. Everything felt still, But the memories came in waves, all the birthdays I'd planned alone, the holiday dinners where I waited for calls that never came, the small sacrifices no one noticed, the new shoes I didn't buy, the car I drove for 14 years, the vacations I postponed. I thought about Michael's mother, a woman I'd never met whose opinion carried more weight than mine, the woman who'd decided I didn't belong at my own daughter's wedding. I thought about Rachel's LOL, a casual dismissal that made my presence a joke, a burden to be managed through a screen. And I thought about myself not as a mother, not as a widow, but as a woman. What did I want? Peace, dignity, a life that didn't revolve around being useful to people who only showed up when they needed something. That night, around 9 p.m., the doorbell rang. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was Daniel, still in his office clothes, tie loosened sleeves rolled up, holding his phone like a shield. "Mom," he said, stepping inside before I could speak, "why aren't you answering your phone? Rachel's freaking out." I shut the door calmly, my voice even. "Hello to you too," he sighed, pacing the living room. "She says you're not coming to the wedding now that you're being difficult." I laughed, the sound sharp and hollow. Difficult. For not attending a wedding I was uninvited from. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "Michael's parents are footing most of the bill, Mom. You know how traditional they are." I raised an eyebrow, my tone cutting. Traditional, I already paid $30,000. I was about to send another $50,000. That's not tradition, that's a transaction. Daniel froze, his face paling. "Wait, you were sending another $50,000, was I said, sipping my wine? Not anymore." His voice rose, his agitation clear. "Mom, they're counting on that." The venue, the food, I cut him off, my tone firm. Not my problem anymore. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, his voice rising. "Of course it's your problem. She's your daughter." I looked at him, my voice quiet but unyielding. "And I'm her mother. A mother who was told to stay home and watch from a screen." He stared at me, his frustration boiling over. "You always make everything about yourself." That was it. The moment something inside me gave way, a final thread snapping after years of bending. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice soft but firm. "What you heard me, Daniel. Get out." He stood there for a second, then turned and walked out the door, clicking shut behind him, a sound louder than any slam. I stood in the middle of my living room, my heart pounding, and realized something startling. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The next morning, Wednesday, June 4th, 2024, I woke to 43 missed calls and a string of frantic messages from Rachel. They started with passive-aggressive guilt. "Mom, we need to talk. Why are you doing this? This is childish." Then the tone shifted, her desperation growing. "The venue just called. The payment didn't go through. We're going to lose everything if we don't pay by tomorrow. Michael's parents are furious. They said this proves they were right about you." At 3:24 a.m., she sent, "I don't understand why you're doing this to me." I smiled into my coffee, the warmth of the mug, a contrast to the coldness of her words. Of course she didn't understand Rachel had grown up with my sacrifices woven so tightly into her life that she never questioned where her comfort came from. She assumed I'd always be there, a silent bank account, a mother who never said no. Around 10:00 a.m., while reviewing contracts at my desk, an email popped into my inbox, the subject line a plea. "Please don't ruin my wedding." I opened it, my heart steady. Mom Rachel wrote, "I know you're upset about the live stream situation, but this is extreme. We've lost the venue deposit, and if we don't pay the remaining balance by end of day Paris time, the caterer walks. Michael's parents are beyond upset. They're saying this proves you can't be reasoned with. Please don't do this. We can talk about you attending the ceremony, but we need the funds first." There it was, the offer to talk about letting me attend now that the money was gone. Not an apology, not a reflection, but a negotiation, as if my presence at my daughter's wedding could be bartered, bought, or sold depending on my generosity. I didn't respond. I closed the email and turned back to my work. Around noon, James stopped by my desk, his smile warm. Lunch, he offered. That new Italian place just opened. I almost declined as I usually did, but something shifted a clarity born from the past 24 hours. I nodded. I'd like that. Over pasta, James shared stories about his grandkids, his eyes softening as he described chasing after them. He paused, then said gently, "Forgive me, Evelyn, but you seem lighter today." I surprised myself. I told him everything. Rachel's email, the wedding, the money, my decision to cancel the transfer. When I finished, he didn't judge, didn't try to fix it. He just said, "Sometimes the hardest part of love is setting boundaries, especially with those we've given the most to." He squeezed my hand briefly across the table. "I think you did the right thing." For the first time in a long time, I believe that too. When I returned to my desk, there were more calls, more texts, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence spoke volumes. That evening, as I pulled into my driveway around 6 p.m., the sky dimming my porch light, clicking on automatically, I saw someone sitting on my front steps. As I got closer, I recognized her Lily Rachel's best friend since 5th grade, who'd spent countless weekends at our house baking cookies and giggling until dawn. I hadn't seen her in years. "Mrs. Harper," she said softly, standing to brush off her coat. "I'm sorry to drop by like this." I unlocked the door, my voice calm. "It's fine. Would you like some tea?" She followed me into the kitchen, her eyes scanning the familiar walls like they held old echoes. I filled the kettle and waited. "Rachel sent you?" I asked, breaking the silence. Lily didn't answer right away, then nodded. "She's a mess. They lost the venue." The florist dropped out. "Michael's parents are threatening to cancel the wedding." I said nothing, placing 2 mugs on the counter. "She's panicking," Lily continued. "She knows she messed up, she just doesn't know how to fix it." I met her gaze. "Is that why you're here to fix it?" She shook her head. "No, I'm here to ask, is there anything she can say or do to change your mind?" I paused the question, hanging heavy. Would an apology erase the pain of being excluded, of being used like a bank account, of being told I wasn't welcome unless my money was? I looked at Lily, still young, still hopeful. "No," I said quietly. "There isn't." Lily's shoulders sagged. "Not even if she apologizes." I handed her a mug of tea, my voice steady. "Words are easy, Lily, especially when people are desperate. But the people who love you don't wait until you cut them off to see you." She nodded slowly, looking down into her tea. "I get it," she said, her voice soft. "Even if she doesn't." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harper." I smiled faintly. "You don't need to be." We stood in silence for a moment. 2 women from different generations connected by a hard truth. Sometimes love has limits, and sometimes the only way to be seen is to walk away. Lily didn't stay long. She thanked me, hugged me gently, and walked back into the night, leaving me with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Lily's visit on the evening of June 3rd, 2024, left me standing in my kitchen, the warmth of the tea mug fading in my hands as her words echoed. "Rachel knows she messed up. She just doesn't know how to fix it." But I knew better. Rachel's panic wasn't remorse. It was desperation, a reaction to the $50,000 I'd canceled for her wedding venue in Napa Valley, the payment she'd counted on after disinviting me with a cold email. "Mom, don't come to my wedding. Watch through live stream. LOL." I'd already given $30,000, poured decades of sacrifices into her life, only to be reduced to a Google Meet link, a virtual ghost on her big day. Lily's question, "Is there anything she can say or do to change your mind?" had solidified my resolve. No, there wasn't. I'd been the mother who gave everything. But that night, I closed the door on that version of myself, choosing a new path, one where my presence wasn't negotiable. The next day unfolded with a quiet intensity. By 3:49 p.m., I was back at my desk at Harper & Ellis Law, the office humming with the usual rhythm of phone calls and keyboard clicks. My phone buzzed incessantly, more calls, more texts from Rachel, her messages growing increasingly frantic. "Mom, the caterer's threatening to walk. We need the money now. Michael's parents are saying this is all your fault. Please just pay the balance. We'll figure out the guest list later." Each message was a plea, but not for forgiveness, for my wallet. I ignored them, my focus on the contracts in front of me, the steady rhythm of work a shield against the storm brewing in my family. I'd already set my boundary canceling the $50,000 transfer, and I wasn't turning back. But I knew more needed to be done to protect myself, to ensure Rachel and Daniel couldn't keep exploiting my love. Around 4 p.m., I called David Thompson, my longtime financial advisor at First Federal Bank, the same man who'd helped me cancel the transfer the day before. "David?" I said, my voice steady. "I need to make some changes to my accounts and estate plan." He paused, his tone careful. "What kind of changes, Mrs. Harper?" I explained my decision. I wanted to redirect all future funds, my savings, my retirement account, the equity in my home into a trust for my grandchildren, bypassing Rachel and Daniel entirely. I also wanted to freeze any joint accounts I still held with them, including the emergency fund I'd set up years ago for their benefit. I need to make sure they can't access anything. I said, my tone firm. "They've taken enough." David didn't question my decision. He'd seen enough of my family's dynamics over the years to understand. "I'll draft the paperwork and send it over by tomorrow morning," he promised. "You're doing the right thing, Evelyn." That evening, around 7 p.m., I sat on my porch with a glass of red wine, the same bottle I'd opened the night before, watching the sky deepen into twilight. The air was cool, the scent of blooming jasmine from my garden mixing with the faint saltiness of the Oregon breeze. My phone had finally gone quiet, no more calls, no more texts, but I knew the silence wouldn't last. Rachel and Daniel were scrambling their wedding plans, unraveling without my financial support, and I braced myself for what I knew was coming, a confrontation. I thought about a woman I'd met at a widow's support group years ago, Clara, 62, who'd shared how her son had demanded her savings for his new car, then stopped calling her on holidays. I gave him everything Clara had said, her voice breaking, but I learned I had to give myself something too. Clara's story had stayed with me, a quiet warning I'd ignored until now. I was done giving at my own expense. I was choosing myself, my dignity, my future. Around 8:30 p.m., headlights cut through the darkness as a car pulled into my driveway. I recognized it immediately. Rachel's sedan, the one I'd helped her buy when she moved back to Oregon after New York. She stepped out, her face pale, her eyes red from crying, followed by Daniel, his expression a mix of frustration and guilt. I stood setting my wine glass on the porch table as they approached, Rachel's voice trembling before she even reached the steps. "Mom, why are you doing this?" she said, her tone raw, her hands gesturing wildly. "The wedding's falling apart. We lost the venue, the caterer, everything. Michael's parents are furious, and it's all because of you." I opened the door, stepping aside to let them in, my voice calm but unyielding. "Come inside, we'll talk." They followed me into the living room, the same space where Daniel had stood just days ago accusing me of making everything about myself. Rachel sat on the edge of the couch, her hands wringing together, while Daniel paced near the fireplace, his jaw tight. "Mom." Rachel started again, her voice breaking. "I know the live stream thing was maybe not the best idea, but this is extreme. You can't just pull the money like that. We were counting on it." I sat across from her, my hands folded in my lap, my gaze steady. "You were counting on my money," I said, my tone even. "Not on me. You made that clear when you told me to stay home and watch from a screen." Rachel's face crumpled, tears spilling over. "It wasn't my decision, Michael's mom. She said we needed to keep it small, and I didn't want to fight her. I thought you'd understand." I looked at her, the daughter I'd raised, the girl I'd held through every heartbreak, every failure, and felt a quiet ache, not for her pain, but for the mother I'd been always understanding, always giving. "I've always understood Rachel." I said, my voice soft but firm. "I understood when you needed extra credits in college, when you moved to New York, when you came back broke. I understood when you canceled Thanksgiving, when you didn't call on my birthday, when you took $30,000 for a wedding I wasn't allowed to attend, but I'm done understanding." She stared at me, her mouth opening, then closing, her tears falling faster. Daniel stopped pacing, his voice sharp. "Mom, you're being unfair. Rachel's under a lot of pressure. Michael's family is complicated. You can't punish her for that." I turned to him, my gaze hard. "Unfair," I said, my tone rising for the first time. "I gave $30,000 my life savings for her wedding. I was about to send another $50,000. I co-signed your mortgage, gave you $10,000 for your house. I've given everything. Daniel and you both treated me like a bank account, not a mother." I pulled out my phone, opening the email Rachel had sent, and read aloud. "If you want to be a part of it, you can watch through the Google Meet link, LOL." Does that sound like a mother being invited to her daughter's wedding? Rachel sobbed, her hands covering her face, but Daniel's expression hardened, his voice defensive. "You're overreacting," he said. "It's just a wedding. You're making it about you, like always." That was the moment I felt the last thread of patience snap, a quiet fire igniting in my chest. "Get out," I said, my voice low but unyielding. "Both of you." Rachel looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Mom, please." "No," I cut her off, standing. "I've given you everything, my money, my time, my love, and you threw it back in my face. I'm done being the villain in your story, the one you use and discard. Get out of my house." Daniel grabbed Rachel's arm, pulling her toward the door, his voice bitter. "Fine, Mom. Have it your way." Rachel's sobs echoed as they left the door, slamming behind them, the sound reverberating through the quiet house. I stood in the living room, my heart pounding the silence heavier than ever. But beneath the ache, I felt something new, a sense of freedom, a clarity I hadn't known in years. I'd set a boundary, one I never thought I'd have the strength to draw, and it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost long ago. I thought about a woman I'd met at a community book club, Sarah, 65, who'd shared how her daughter had excluded her from a family reunion because she didn't fit the vibe. I stopped giving after that. Sarah had said, her voice steady, and I started living for myself. Sarah's words had lingered, a quiet prophecy of this moment. I was done giving at my own expense. I was ready to live for myself, to rewrite my story on my own terms. The echo of the slamming door lingered in my living room that night of June 4th, 2024, as Rachel and Daniel left their accusations and tears fading into the darkness outside. I stood there, my heart still pounding from the confrontation, the weight of my words. I'm done being the villain in your story, settling over me like a quiet shield. I'd canceled the $50,000 transfer for Rachel's wedding venue in Napa Valley, redirected my estate into a trust for my grandchildren, and frozen the accounts she and Daniel could access, ensuring they couldn't take more than the $30,000 I'd already given. That email on June 3rd, 2024, "Mom, don't come to my wedding. Watch through live stream." LOL had been the breaking point, a cruel dismissal of my decades of sacrifice. But it also became the moment I chose myself over the endless cycle of giving. At 59, I was no longer the mother who stayed silent. I was Evelyn Harper, a woman ready to rewrite her story. The days that followed were a strange blend of peace and adjustment. Rachel and Daniel didn't call again, their silence a confirmation of the boundary I'd set, though I knew they were likely scrambling to salvage their wedding plans without my financial support. By early July 2024, I heard through a mutual friend that they'd managed a small backyard ceremony at Michael's parents' home, a far cry from the Napa Valley extravaganza they'd envisioned. I wasn't invited, not even to watch through a screen this time, and I found I didn't care. The ache I'd felt when I first read Rachel's email had dulled, replaced by a quiet clarity that came from letting go. I'd spent decades bracing for guilt trips disguised as love, waking each morning, wondering who needed me, what I could give. But now I woke to the sound of birds chirping outside my Portland window, the scent of jasmine from my garden drifting in, and for the first time in years, I felt unburdened. I returned to my routine at Harper & Ellis Law, the office, a steady anchor in my new chapter. James, my boss, noticed the change, stopping by my desk one morning with a latte and a smile. "You seem different, Evelyn," he said, his voice warm, lighter somehow. I smiled back, a genuine smile, and told him, "Or I'm learning to live for myself." He nodded, understanding in his eyes, and that small moment of connection reminded me I wasn't alone. I started saying yes to things. I'd always declined lunches with James, a pottery class, at the community center dinner, with friends who saw me for who I was, not what I could give. I read novels I'd shelved for years, planted new roses in my garden, their vibrant pinks and yellows, a testament to the life I was building for myself. In late July, Rachel sent one more email, a long emotional message that was half apology, half justification. "Mom," she wrote, "I'm sorry for how I handled the wedding. I was under so much pressure from Michael's family, I didn't mean to hurt you. I miss you and I want to make things right. I read it once, my heart steady, and archived it." The words felt hollow, a reaction to the consequences she'd faced, not a genuine reflection of her actions. I wasn't angry anymore, I was done. There was a strange peace in letting go, not in rage, but in clarity, a realization that I didn't have to burn myself to keep others warm. I thought about a woman I'd met at a local gardening club, Margaret, 67, who'd shared how her son had excluded her from his life after she stopped funding his lavish lifestyle. I thought I'd lose him forever. Margaret had said, her voice steady, but I found myself instead. Margaret's story mirrored mine, a quiet reminder that sometimes the greatest act of love is the one you give yourself. I made a new rule for my life: if my presence is negotiable, so is my effort. I stopped waiting for Rachel and Daniel to see me, stopped hoping for apologies that would never come. Instead, I poured my energy into the things that brought me joy: my garden, my books, the laughter of friends over a shared meal. I visited my grandchildren, Rachel's 2 young daughters, at their daycare, arranging with their teacher to pick them up for ice cream on weekends. Their giggles as they licked their cones, their sticky hands in mine, filled the spaces Rachel and Daniel had left empty. I set up a trust for them, ensuring the money I'd saved would go toward their futures, college first homes, dreams I'd never see exploited the way Rachel had exploited my love. One afternoon in August 2024, I was pruning my roses when Daniel showed up unannounced, his car pulling into my driveway around 3 p.m. He stepped out, his face drawn, his shoulders slumped, a stark contrast to the defensive man who'd stood in my living room weeks ago. "Mom," he said, his voice soft, "can we talk?" I nodded, setting down my shears, and we sat on the porch steps, the sun warm on our shoulders. He looked down at his hands, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry," he said, the words heavy. "For everything. For what Rachel did, for what I said, I was wrong. I didn't see how much you'd given until you stopped." I listened, my heart steady, the ache still there, but softer now. "I love you, Daniel," I said, my voice calm. "But love doesn't mean I have to keep giving until there's nothing left of me. I've set boundaries now for myself, for my peace." He nodded, tears in his eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the boy. He'd been the one who'd hugged me tight after I co-signed his mortgage, the one who'd called me on Mother's Day with a laugh in his voice. "I want to make things right," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know how, but I want to try." I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Start by seeing me," I said. "Not what I can give, but who I am." He nodded, a promise in his eyes, and though I didn't know if he'd keep it, I felt a flicker of hope, not for the past, but for a future where I wasn't invisible. Rachel never reached out again, her silence a choice I'd come to accept. I heard through Lily that she and Michael had settled into a quiet life, their grand wedding plans, a distant memory, but I didn't dwell on it. I was too busy living, planting new flowers, shaping clay in my pottery class, laughing over pasta with James, who'd become a dear friend. I thought about the decades I'd spent giving the years I'd lost waiting for Rachel and Daniel to see me, and realized I'd found something more precious than their approval myself. I'd learned a lesson I wished I'd known sooner. Love doesn't mean losing yourself, and the strongest boundaries are the ones you set for your own heart. If my story touched you, if you've ever had to choose yourself after giving too much, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below what's the moment that made you set a boundary that changed your life. Like and subscribe for more stories of healing and hope, because this isn't the end. It's the beginning of a life where I'm finally seen by the person who matters most to me.